Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. And the UN Commission of Inquiry has published a report which says there are probable grounds to believe that Israel has committed 4 of the 5 acts meeting the international law's definition of genocide. Being clear, even just one of them means you're committing genocide. The report also suggests that the genocide is deliberate on the part of Israel as well. The Israelis, of course, have hit back with counter-accusations, which I'll go over, but with nobody outside partisan circles really believing that Israel is acting in accordance with human rights laws here, what will this report actually do in practice? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So sorry this will be a long one, but it is actually very major development and I need to go through quite a few things. But before we look at the potential impact, let's just do a quick for and against here. The UN report cites these 4 acts. First, killing members of a group. Well, Israel don't even seem to bother denying that. They've even described Palestinian infants as Hamas. Second, causing them serious bodily and mental harm. Again, it's undeniable. I mean, from the start, like you remember Israel opening up safe corridors for refugees. You need to evacuate to here. And then when they did, they bombed them in transit, claiming, oh, we think there's some Hamas in there. In fact, the number of acts committed which would appear to hit this marker are too numerous to go over. Third, deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to destroy the group. Well, the Israeli government today is boasting that Gaza is burning. They have stated their intention to destroy the entirety of Gaza and even implied they will be taking over the whole of Palestine. In fact, I seem to recall one Israeli figure this summer even talking about invading parts of other Arab states, that Palestine's not enough for them. Israel is completely out of control. And fourth, preventing births. So what's the only box Israel hasn't been accused of checking? That would be forcibly transferring Palestinian children to Israeli homes, which would be act number 5, something Russia has done with Ukrainian children. But everything else, the UN says, has reasonable grounds to conclude that these acts have been committed. Now, that phrase reasonable grounds is a legal threshold, by the way. It suggests a significant body of evidence supporting the findings. They haven't just mulled it over at lunch and consulted the magic 8 ball. So what have Israel said in defence? Well, according to a BBC report, this is their rebuttal. They claim that the Commission are Hamas proxies. This seems unlikely. They're appointed by the Human Rights Council, who themselves represent a fair distribution of UN member states across the world. I mean, anti-Semites frequently claim, do they not, that Jews have massively outsized influence on global affairs. Everything someone does, oh, they're doing that because of the Israel lobby, the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby is massive, you know that, don't you? That they're running the world behind the scenes, goes right back to the Nazis, of course. This is basically the Jewish state leaning into exactly the same thinking here, isn't it? Like, oh, Hamas control everything. Do they? I don't think Hamas are a secret Illuminati. Second, they claim that Hamas have attempted genocide in Israel. Now, this is perfectly true. Hamas are genocidal. They would do to Israel exactly what Israel are doing to Palestine if they had the chance. Yes. Isn't that basically an admission of genocide on the part of Israel? We're only doing what Hamas want to do to us. And you've just said Hamas are genocidal. But the key point here is that Hamas aren't strong enough to do that. It is not necessary to secure Israel's security to destroy Palestine, right? And actually, Israel's actions have only provided more support for Hamas around the world. The anti-Semites are loving this, absolutely loving it, because now they've got moderate people on their side. That appears to be it from Israel as well. They don't seem to have anything else. The UN have conducted a serious review. They're not an international court, hence why they say probable. They can't undermine international courts who provide the actual judgment. But a serious review has taken place, conducted by the appropriate wing of the UN, evidence-based, and that wing of the UN, as I say, is elected by member states around the world. It's representative of humanity, basically. And the other thing is this. I mean, I sometimes use the analogy of a broken leg for things like this. Like, I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose illnesses or injuries. But if I see someone's leg pointing the wrong way and there's a bone sticking out, I'm going to say, I think they've broken their leg. You know, some things are just so obvious, you arguably don't need to be a doctor. Same here. I'm not a lawyer. right? Israel's actions in Gaza and their accompanying statements are so obviously an attempt to wipe out Palestinians from existence, to the point where they even say babies are legitimate targets, and they've said that. So whatever the legal arguments are, in terms of our everyday understanding, it's genocide. It's driven by paranoia in Israel that everyone's out to get them. But of course, these acts are making their paranoia more likely to be true, self-fulfilling prophecy. And especially after the attack on Qatar. How can anyone in the Arab world feel safe now? Qatar is a US ally. Yet, although the US did not approve of the attack, Rubio's just given Israel his full backing. The US has taken no punitive action against Israel for attacking one of its allies. The US has decided it's not all that bothered about its relations with the Arab world when it comes to it. If Trump is Putin's toady, then his administration more widely is Israel's bitch, which creates a very dangerous situation for Israel. Like, I would say, I actually said this for a while, but I would certainly say now, supporting Israel and supporting the Israeli government are antagonistic. You can do one or the other, not both. How will Israel be safe in the long term? I keep saying Netanyahu's old, right? He only has to get through a few more years. Israel presumably wants to go into the next century. How is it going to be safe with this action? They've now created a situation where other Arab countries don't feel safe. They might be able to bully Palestinians. Will they be able to take on a united Arab coalition if they force the issue? Right? If they make Arabs feel under threat and that Israel is the source of that threat. But beyond that, what is the outcome of the report? What does it mean? Well, you may be thinking, look, haven't there been other UN reports critical of Israel? And it's like, yes, there have. Previous UN probes often used cautious language, however, talking about possible war crimes or carefully phrased concerns like disproportionate force. This one skips those caveats. It prints the word genocide, black and white, stark, undeniable. That is a huge shift in tone and implication. And it's not just the terminology. This report names names. So you've got the president, the prime minister, the defense minister, two high-ranking generals. It's not an abstract accusation against a state or a government. It's personalising the issue. It makes specific individuals legally vulnerable. And what does that mean in practice? Under universal jurisdiction laws, which allow certain grave crimes, and you don't get much graver, to be prosecuted anywhere, future international travel or overseas banking could become risky for these officials. They could face arrest warrants or asset freezes in countries that uphold these principles. That moves the conversation from general condemnation to individual accountability, a much more potent form of pressure. The naming of these high-ranking officials underscores the Commission's findings that these actions are not random, but part of a deliberate policy or strategy. I mean, let's consider those realities again. So, let's put some data in here. You've got 1.7 million people were crammed into Rafah. It's a city that was built for maybe 200,000. Now imagine the density that on top of the lack of sanitation, the sheer impossibility of providing basic services, even if you weren't bombing the crap out of everywhere. It's a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. A massive concentration of displaced individuals with nowhere left to go, living in conditions that are inhumane. 70% of homes in northern Gaza destroyed or damaged. That's not an estimate, that's based on satellite analysis, offering a stark visual confirmation of the scale of the destruction. You think about that. Entire neighbourhoods flattened, homes turned to rubble, families rendered permanently homeless. Where do they go? Where do these people go? How do they rebuild? It's a systematic eradication of living spaces, forcing mass displacement and creating an almost insurmountable challenge for any future reconstruction. I think the latest now is 1 in every 10 kids under 5 is acutely malnourished. World Food Programme isn't mincing its words. This isn't hunger, acute malnutrition. A severe and life-threatening condition that will have long-term consequences for an entire generation. Even if they live, their development is now being badly hampered. Right? That speaks directly to the deliberate infliction of conditions meant to destroy as access to food has been severely restricted. And the doctors, heroes on the front lines, they tell the same consistent story everywhere. They're watching antibiotics run out mid-surgery, forcing impossible choices. Patients wake up on hallway floors. There are no beds, no proper recovery spaces. And with every incoming blast, the mental health backlog grows. A crushing weight of trauma that no one can treat because the therapists are grieving, displaced, struggling to survive themselves. The healthcare system isn't just overwhelmed, it's being deliberately dismantled. Unable to cope with the sheer volume and severity of injuries and psychological distress. Every time they bomb a hospital, oh, we think Hamas are in there. This collapse of the healthcare system is a direct contributor to the serious bodily or mental harm criterion. Naturally, Israel is rejecting the genocide label outright, even though they're like admitting to most of the conditions for it. Their officials consistently point to Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, which states that intent to destroy, in whole or in part, must be targeted against a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. Israel is arguing that its war is aimed at Hamas, an armed organisation, not at Palestinians as a people. They maintain that their actions are defensive and aimed at neutralising the terrorist threat. But this distinction between targeting a political military group versus an entire ethnic group is central to their defence. But the UN Commission counters this argument by citing public statements from, not Hamas, from top Israeli officials. They highlight comments referring to Gaza as the city of evil and vows to turn it into rubble. These statements, the Commission argues, provide evidence of intent that goes beyond targeting Hamas. When leaders use dehumanising language and express a desire for widespread destruction, it becomes a little bit tricky to argue that the intent is solely limited to a very specific armed group. The UN says intent in this context can reasonably be inferred from those words, combined with the sheer scale of destruction and civilian casualties we've just discussed. Even by Israel's, the IDF's own figures, only a small proportion of those they've killed are Hamas, by their own figures. This is about looking at the rhetoric alongside the actions. Now, let's distinguish between a couple of key international legal bodies here, because it can get a little bit confusing. Because you've got the International Criminal Court, where Britain is already prosecuting Israel. That's an entirely separate from the UN itself, although it works closely with it. The ICC does have the power to indict individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and even genocide. At the moment, of course, we know prosecutor Karim Khan had already sought arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders earlier this year. Genocide wasn't one of the charges they were pursuing. It was war crimes and crimes against humanity. If the ICC judges approve those warrants, the individuals named, which they sort of have, the ones that are still living, they could then be theoretically arrested in any of the court's 124 member states, most of which I think are going to do it. There's the odd one that is clearly not. That means travel restrictions, a potential assets freeze, permanent stain on their international standing. So that's a powerful mechanism for individual accountability, but its reach is limited by which countries recognise its jurisdiction. The United States and Israel are not two of them. Then we have the International Court of Justice. Now, this is where South Africa launched its case against Israel, accusing it of violating the Genocide Convention. The ICJ can issue binding orders to halt military operations, amongst other things. It hasn't ordered a full ceasefire yet because they're still deliberating. It has issued provisional measures, like demanding Israel open up more aid crossings and ensure humanitarian assistance reaches Gaza. But, of course, enforcement of ICJ rulings is political. Any sanctions or concrete action to enforce these orders requires a vote in the UN Security Council, where, as we all know, the US wields veto power. So in short, courtrooms with their intricate procedures and legalistic pace move at the speed of procedure. Gaza, unfortunately, moves at the speed of artillery and escalating conflict. The gap between legal pronouncements and on-the-ground reality is a challenge. Washington's relationship with Israel is complex, but, they're in Israel's thrall, basically. The US sends a hefty $4 billion in military aid to Israel annually. Under US law, that aid is supposed to be cut off if a country blocks American humanitarian assistance or commits gross violations of human rights. Trump actually said after his last meeting with Starmer, again, I'll keep pointing out the importance of actually getting to talk to Trump. After Starmer's last face-to-face meeting with Trump, he got Trump to say that Israel was withholding American humanitarian assistance. But the aid wasn't cut off. But that is a clear legal provision. But every president since Reagan has found wiggle room, creative interpretations or waivers that allowed the aid to continue flowing, as it still is doing. This time, though, it could be harder to ignore. You might see heated hearings in the House Foreign Affairs Committee with greater calls for accountability. There will undoubtedly be a strong push to condition at least some of the aid, maybe tying it to humanitarian access or adherence to international law. But if we're realistic, a full aid cut remains highly unlikely, especially with MAGA in control now, where they don't really adhere to any norms of the social contract anywhere. I mean, Trump is directing military forces against his own people, for goodness sake. He doesn't really care about someone in the Middle East. The ripple effects of the report are not going to be confined to the halls of the UN or Western capitals, though. They are, of course, profoundly felt across the Middle East. You know, you're going to be adding succor to Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, for example. Like I keep saying, Israel is the architect of its own destruction here. Not only can they not rely on America being the supreme military power forever, the way Trump is going, it might not even be for that much longer. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, there's a different kind of scramble. The UAE are going to be urging everyone to return to peace talks. Why? Because there's a very real fear amongst pragmatic Arab states of a total collapse of the two-state framework. If that happens, then you increase the chance of direct conflict, proper, like region-wide direct conflict. This is sort of why I think a parallel case with Russia and Ukraine, one reason why Western powers don't want to get into a direct confrontation with Russia is because they fear where it could snowball. Similar thing in the Middle East. They really want a buffer zone between Israel and themselves. If they all get sucked in, then goodness knows what happens. Then you think about the long-term thing here. Like the humanitarian crisis, it's not just in Gaza. It threatens to spill over and create a wider regional catastrophe. So, I mean, imagine the future, or lack thereof, for Gaza. Like, let's say the guns fell silent tomorrow. Let's say Trump has actually had enough. And he says to Netanyahu, will you stop now? The road to recovery, imagine how long and steep that's going to be. Rebuilding, I think, is already estimated to cost about $50 billion and will take decades. I imagine trying to rebuild from scratch an entire city. It's not just about patching up a few buildings. You've got to reconstruct an entire society from the ground up. Gaza's only power plant, that's rubble. University system, the backbone of its intellectual future, is mostly gone. I mean, economists are quite clear here. They say that the Strip's GDP shrank by 86% in just 6 months. So then you add what will, even if the guns fall silent, you know, genocide lawsuits are going to be carrying on. Like investors, what investors are going to want to touch a place embroiled in such a profound legal and ethical controversy? The risk is astronomical. The UN talks optimistically of a Marshall Plan for Gaza, but who volunteers to foot that bill while court cases hang overhead, potentially implicating those who might otherwise offer aid? The legal shadow cast by this report makes economic recovery, indeed any semblance of a normal life, a distant dream. It's a vicious cycle. Conflict prevents development. The legal fallout from conflict further deters any potential for rebuilding. And until it's rebuilt, like Palestinians are going to quite reasonably harbour a grudge, even if there's no further killing. So given all this, what does the future hold? I mean, it's never really black and white, is it? But we can sketch out a few plausible scenarios. First would be the diplomatic freeze, I guess. In this scenario, you've got Latin American and European states emboldened by the UN report, recognising Palestinian sovereignty, where more of us are moving towards that position quite soon. That would further isolate Israel in multilateral forums like the UN General Assembly and various international bodies, making it harder for them to garner international support or pass resolutions. I mean, like I keep saying, Israel is losing allies over this. It's absolutely insane. However, while this could be a significant diplomatic blow, it wouldn't change anything on the ground itself. It's a symbolic victory, one that doesn't immediately translate into a cessation of hostilities or a radical shift in policy. Israel thinks it only needs America on its side, and America is on its side. Second one could be a legal net tightening. That would be where the ICC steps up. The ICC approves those arrest warrants. Some already have. They may need to look at others. Israeli leaders find themselves unable to travel freely overseas. So that is already the case for a couple of them. Constantly looking over their shoulders, fearing detention in allied countries. But again, if there's only like 2 or 3 countries they even care to go to, they may not mind. Simultaneously, of course, allied nations might start seriously weighing sanctions reminiscent of apartheid-era South Africa. We may get targeted economic measures, arms embargoes, travel bans. We've already got some of those, not enough. This scenario brings real tangible consequences for individuals and the state. In terms of arms embargoes, if we can't persuade America to join in, that's worthless. But if you think about translating legal pronouncements into practical restrictions, there must surely come a tipping point where if the US won't act, other countries working together can. Trade would be a key one. The EU, unfortunately, is really badly split. But if the EU imposed trade sanctions, that would hurt Israel, because America is their sugar daddy, but most of their trade is with the EU. If the EU applied trade sanctions, that would hurt. The third possibility, of course, is business as usual, which is the less optimistic outlook. The US continues to exercise its veto power in the Security Council because Trump doesn't really care what other countries think of him, blocking any meaningful international action. Aid keeps flowing to Israel without conditions and then not flowing into Gaza. And the report, despite its gravity, simply gathers dust like many before it. The world moves on, distracted by other crises. The situation in Gaza remains largely unchanged, with the international community failing to translate its outrage into effective action. That's a cynical look. Unfortunately, it's often a realistic look, isn't it, in international politics? Now, we could get a mix of all three outcomes. The USA is clearly not ready to even shackle Israel, much less take action against them. Other governments will not only be feeling the hand of history on their shoulders, they know what's going on, but also the objections of their publics. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.